The head of the European Commission said that China is heavily subsidizing its industries, and so therefore Europe has to respond, otherwise European industries will be at a competitive disadvantage. And so this is where Ursula von der Leyen said that there would be this clean technology plan, which would involve support for European industries in the green sector. Now, that has a rationale based on different things. Firstly, the fact that Europe itself has committed itself to carbon neutrality by 2050, so it's got to make these changes, it's got to make this transition anyway. But the key thing is it's got to do it in a way that strengthens Europe's position vis-à-vis China rather than weakens Europe's position vis-à-vis China. So yes, indeed, Jeannie, China loomed very, very large in this speech, and one got the impression that that the EU really has a strong sense of very long-term competition with China, strategic competition, economic competition with China.
Now, von der Leyen also announced plans for what she called a sovereignty fund to defend Europe's industry. Tell us a bit more about what that is exactly.
Yeah, so the background to that is, you'll remember last year President Biden announced the Inflation Reduction Act with a lot of subsidies to support American industries. It's a similar sort of thing to what I was saying with China. So those subsidies to US industries, again, from the European point of view, that puts European industries at a competitive disadvantage. So again, Europe has to respond to that US Inflation Reduction Act. The question is, how does it do that? So Europe it can't just suddenly get rid of all its rules on state aid, because that would create competition between EU member states. So for example, you've got Germany, which has a lot more money than some smaller EU countries. If Germany was suddenly allowed to subsidize its own industries as much as it wants, then other EU partners of Germany can't match that. So you get a kind of race to the bottom, in a sense, with subsidies, and then Europe just shoots itself in the foot in this big global geopolitical picture. So what Ursula von der Leyen talked about in this speech was temporarily adapting Europe's state aid rules, so introducing a bit of flexibility. It basically sounded like loosening the state aid rules, but going along with that, she said there's a plan to introduce a sovereignty fund. So what that means is that countries that don't have the spending power that Germany has, for example, that can't subsidize their industries as much as Germany can subsidize its industries, they would effectively, this is kind of the thinking behind all this, they would be able to dip into this European sovereignty fund, and that would kind of offset the fact that they don't have the spending power of some of the bigger EU member states like France and Germany. But it's politically very tricky, this whole sovereignty fund idea, Jeannie, because the more frugal European states don't want joint borrowing to finance this sovereignty fund. So you could sort of tell Ursula von der Leyen was treading on eggshells a bit here. She was talking about a temporary mechanism to answer to the most immediate needs, but the actual sovereignty fund would be something that could be put in place much later this year. So you could get the sense there, I think, that politically this is going to be a real hot potato. This sovereignty fund is not something that can just be created overnight because of these different because of the various divisions and the different views on how European spending should work in the EU. So it's definitely very much a work in progress. There is going to be a special summit on February the 9th to start kind of fleshing out all of Europe's response, essentially, to the US Inflation Reduction Act.
All right, thanks, Simon.